Hi, welcome to the Your Voice Here podcast. This podcast is all about taking a fun and inspiring look at people's journeys into podcasting, radio presenting, being a voiceover artist, or whatever they're looking to use their voice for to be heard. My name is Jeremy Chapman, and I'm the host of this podcast. My guest today on the Your Voice Here podcast is a radio presenter and radio producer for BBC Radio Guernsey. It's Steph Watkins.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon to you. It's Steph Watkins here with you on the BBC across the Channel Islands. Let's get your...
Steph and I both started our journey at pretty much the same time back in July 2020 when we were volunteering at a community radio station together. We chat about our time there, along with where our journeys have taken us to now and what we'd like to achieve next. I'm joined by my next guest on the podcast. She's a radio presenter and journalist for BBC Radio, and she's someone that's whose path crossed with my own on the beginning of my radio journey. She's also a wonderful friend of mine as well. I'm joined by Steph Watkins. Steph, lovely to have you here today. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
No, the pleasure is all mine. We both started our radio journeys around a sort of similar time, and our paths crossed as radio presenters when we were volunteering together at a community station. So it's wonderful to see how far you've come from that time to now have you as calling you not only my friend, but you're a BBC presenter and journalist now. So it's really exciting.
It's honestly something that I never would have thought would have been my realistic journey. Every day I'm so grateful for what I get to do.
You can hear, you can tell, and that's the wonderful thing. When knowing you and having met you, you can see there's just this wonderful sense of adventure, but a wonderful level of gratitude that you have as well. And it's so lovely to, as I say, I'm so happy that you're working at the BBC and how far you've progressed, because you deserve it as far as I'm concerned. And I'm blowing smoke up your arse.
Thank you. No, honestly, it is so. The unfortunate thing is I'm really bad at taking compliments, but but it's so lovely. I mean, it's been amazing to have gone from when we met to still being friends and kind of supporting each other's journeys and being genuinely pleased for each other. I think that's the other thing, because there's a lot of people who are, the end goal is sort of a very similar thing. You and I, we present slightly different shows, but the end goal is to be, relatively in the same sort of realm, really. But the toxic side of that is if you can get some people who won't be supportive because they want the same opportunities and they're not quite getting them. And I think that the great thing about our friendship has been we always build each other up, and we're always really happy for every success that both of us get. So that's been an amazing thing to have kind of both of us to have grown over the past couple of years. Thank you. I mean, I was going to say the same to you as well. It's so important, and certainly with my experience so far as a podcaster and radio presenter, you do find that it's so important to find someone who's a good support network, who's there to champion you and to offer fair criticism, or just to say, no, that was good, because it can be very lonely being a radio presenter. And as you say, it's quite cutthroat. And there will be people out there that if you're good, they'll feel threatened by that. So they'll try and restrict your progress. And not all of them are like that. There is just a toxic underbelly there. But the majority, they are quite good and encourage. And if we go back and from the start of your journey, from where you are now, which is fantastic, to then the start, what was it that made you want to have a go at radio presenting? What was it that made you think, yes, I want to do this? So we're going back to July of 2020.
Wow.
So this is, at the time, I had, obviously when the pandemic hit, and it was a very scary time because, none of us knew what was going on. And I was a performer, or at least I was trying to be a performer. I'd worked a lot of minimum wage jobs and sort of branched out into office administration jobs where I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. I felt very unfulfilled. And then the pandemic happened, and I actually moved back to my parents. I was living in London beforehand, and I moved back to my parents in Buckinghamshire. And it was actually, so my boyfriend actually cast a woman who was on this radio station, this community radio station, in a play that showed actually sort of just before the pandemic hit. And she put something up on Facebook saying that they were looking for volunteers. And he said, I think you'd be really good at this. And even when I was trying to do the whole performing thing, I loved it. I really did. I loved being on stage at the time. but I always struggled with the, you know, sort of the dip and the rise of, you know, being busy, then not being busy, and being busy and not being busy. And then also just, I think there was always sort of a slight feeling of unfulfillment with me, you know, having to play other characters, which was great. But I actually also, you know, I loved it when I got to do things like improv and stand up. I did a little bit of as well, because it was a bit more of me in it.
Yeah.
And presenting was always something I'd wanted to try out, but I did not know at all where to start. I thought it was completely unobtainable and unreachable for me. So you know, by the time we saw this post on Facebook, I left a voicemail, and they called back and said, you know, from that already, just that voicemail that you left, we want to give you a go because we think you've got a good voice. And you know, obviously I put on my I put on my best radio voice on that call. Of course I did. And it was just from there I got into it, and I actually felt like I was like, oh, do you know what? I think this is it. Actually, I think this is what I'm meant to do. I finally found it. It took me long enough to discover it, but I finally discovered actually this is what I'm really passionate about. I mean, what an amazing thing to get to sit and listen to music and tell stories about the music that you love. And, you know, on this community station, we actually got to pick the music, or some of the music that was on the playlist as well. So I got to share. I mean, in terms of programming, thinking back now, it probably wasn't the best for some of them. Probably wasn't the best mix of music. It was very random, but it was all, you know, my music style. I like a lot of different things. So it was, you know, a very eclectic mix within an hour of different genres. But it was nice being able to share, you know, why I loved things. And also I then started talking about, you know, community things. I did like a specialist show for children, and I started going, okay, well, let's make this really relevant. And you know, let's talk about, I remember the one that I was really proud of. I did like a sports week for kids.
Yeah.
So it would have been, well, I mean, it was in the pandemic anyway, so all the kids were sort of not in school, but it was like, this thing's going on and this is where you can go to do this. And I was talking about cycling and, you know, where you can find cycle routes and things like that. And, you know, just sort of kind of segmenting it up like that, and kind of discovering sort of structure and form to shows as well.
Yes.
So a lot of it was kind of self-learnt by trial and error, and, you know, putting in beds underneath, and, you know, this is what I hear when I listen to the radio, so this is what I'm going to try and do, and just really experimenting was, you know, that's kind of how I'd, you know, knew that I fell in love with it.
So you'd never had that desire, like as a child, of like, you know, getting a hairbrush and pretending to be a DJ and introducing songs? And
I think I did. I just, it wasn't specifically just that. I used to pretend, you know, because another passion of mine is cooking. And sometimes I'd be in the kitchen cooking, like, as a child, because I you know, I grew up cooking with my mum. And sometimes if she'd leave the room, I'd start pretending I was on like Ready, Steady, Cook or something like that. Yeah. And or like on, I used to watch this woman, I can't remember her name. All I know is we called her the Cake Lady because we had a video of her when I was a child. And for some reason, I really liked watching this video of this woman, basically like sort of like a recipe book, but on video. And she was making a lot of cakes. I think I liked it because there was a Barbie in there somewhere. And you know, so I'd pretend to be like that. So I think that sort of presenting had always been something I'd wanted to do. I mean, you know, being in the car, listening to the radio on the way to school, you listen, you think that's got to be the coolest job ever, you know. So
absolutely, yeah. It
really, you know, of course there was always that desire, but it was like, yeah, you know, I also want to be a multi-millionaire pop star. Like, how realistic is that? You know, it was all that sort of thing.
That is the magic of radio. You just said it. It's like, you know, I used to listen to radio presenters and just think, God, that's the coolest job ever. I'd love to do that. But I never thought it was anything that was an option to me. So we were both at the same community station. So when that opportunity came up, it was like, wow, yeah, I'll have a go. And I agree with you. It was the freedom of just playing music that was maybe personal to us and giving an explanation to it. And I think we've got to be realistic as well, though, as whilst it was an eclectic mix of music, well, that's what the joy of some of these non-commercial radio stations is that you hear music that you wouldn't hear on the commercial stations. And I think that you're tuning in because of the personalities there, and you're supporting a local thing. So I don't think the listeners were ever picky about what music was played. And I think sometimes, you know, I'd get carried away and would think I was at a commercial radio station when I was just broadcasting in my shed. But that drove me then to just, you know, do my show in the best possible way, and to be creative, and to go, well, actually, to me, it was like I was being a kid back in my bedroom and performing and pretending to be a radio presenter.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the just best way to do it, is to go in and be creative, and just to listen to that inner child in us, or that performer in us, and embrace it.
And I think as well, just in terms of what you're talking about there, in terms of, when you're a child, you try the stuff, you play, and you don't have that judgment on you. And I think the good thing about community radio and starting off in an environment like that is that it is a really good playground to just experiment and explore and try things, and to really kind of learn and get comfortable with, the process of radio. And radio is so eclectic, as you say, there is something for everyone. So if that's your thing and you want to tune into radio that is, a little bit, more fine-tuned, then that's fine. But there really is, there's a station for everyone. There really is. And that's the great thing about it. And the even better thing is the people on those shows will be passionate about that. So they are the best people to listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as well, you've got to factor in that there's this massive surge and growth of radio stations now, with internet radio being an option. And so many options are out there where you can go and volunteer, and you can present from home, as we were doing. It was lockdown when we were doing it, so we had to present from home. But actually, the joy of presenting from home was like, well, actually, I'm comfortable, and I can have a cup of tea, and I can still be doing bits at home and stuff. And it was just relaxed radio. That was the thing I loved with it. It was just so relaxed and easygoing. So I'd always recommend to people that want to have a go in radio, definitely go and volunteer. Find your local community station, or have a look online. Something called, I think there's an app called Radio Garden, and you can look on there and see where radio stations are all around the country, and put in where you are, and it comes up with all kinds of stations. So there's hospital radio as well. There's all kinds of options out there that people should go and have a go at, if they've like you and me, Steph, that have never really done it before, but have just maybe got an itch to do it, or just someone's told them to have a go. The options are out there.
Yeah, and I think as well, because we did it in a really specific time. We were in the summer of the first sort of wave of COVID.
Yeah.
Things were slightly starting to open up a little bit, like we had to socially distance and things like that. But I mean, bearing in mind, we didn't actually really get to meet each other that often in person, because we were all doing it from our bedrooms. I mean, the first time before I invested in and even then it was only a £50 microphone that I kind of went and replaced it with. But my first microphone was an old microphone that we sort of dug out of a cupboard somewhere from some old film equipment that my boyfriend had. And it was gaffer taped to a plant pot because it didn't have a stand. So it was sellotaped. It was taped to this plant, inside of the plant pot, with the USB plugged into my It wasn't very glamorous at all. And also, with that summer, it was very hot that summer.
Yes, it was.
And I was sat right next to my bedroom window, which gets the sun in the morning. So if I was ever doing a show that was in the morning, which often I would, and apparently teenage me thought it'd be a really, really great idea to get jet black blinds, which I hugely regretted, because every summer it was so hot in the morning, you'd wake up in a sweat, and so I'd wake up, do this show, be absolutely baking. But I think the great thing about it that time especially was because we were all in a similar situation, Yes. I mean, okay, not everybody was sweating with a taped up microphone, but we were all there, and it was all a bit uncertain, and I think for all of us involved, or for most people I imagine, in that sort of community team at the time, it was a support group in terms of, we weren't counselling each other, but it was a really, really healthy thing for me to have, to go, this is my outlet at the moment, because nothing else is certain. I didn't have a job, until a couple of months later. So it was the only thing I could put my energy into, and it was what was getting me out of bed in the morning. It really did make a huge, huge difference. And what a journey it's been since then.
Well, yes. I mean, I was going to say, this was just the start of your journey. Wonderful to be there, and as you say, it was a coping mechanism. It was a community of really good people that were in a similar boat to us, actually, that had never done radio before. Some were in performing arts, some were just people that just thought, I love music, so they want to have a go. And it created a lovely community of people that supported each other. We all had
different interests as well. We all had different things that we liked, and
absolutely,
we were this big sort of melting pot of sort of covering all areas, which was really interesting. There was so many insightful people there, actually. Really, really interesting mix of people. And, people dropped off, sort of as life moves on. And I ended up moving on to a different community station that was actually closer to where I live, because I wanted to get more into the community stories aspect of things as well. So I wanted to be talking about the area that I lived in as opposed to the one sort of a little bit further down the road. And that, I mean, just in terms of community stations, if anyone's listening and you're thinking about trying it, there's actually different ways of doing community radio station, because some of it is, and I'd probably argue that a lot of it is live broadcast. Things like hospital radio, I believe is live, and certainly the first one that we were doing was live. If for people who do want to try out community radio, they're really lucky, because now that studios are open again, you can go in if they have desks and things like that. I'd say to start with, that was probably one of the things that I really could have benefited from, was actually sort of using a desk. I did manage to get a little bit of sort of knowledge about it later on, once I started going into the station a little bit more regularly for the second community station that I volunteered for. But obviously when we were first doing it all in our bedrooms, you do miss out on that sort of the desk, basically, which is a really, really important thing. Sort of learning how to drive the desk is actually as fundamental as being able to present well and talk well, and just being able to time and things like that. Having the knowledge of the desk is very important. So I think that's something that if I were to go back and the circumstances were a little bit different, I'd advise myself to say, okay, look for somewhere with a desk so you can get as much practice as possible, basically.
And that's where, like, if you've got a hospital radio station near you, they do have often equipment that's ex-BBC, that's been donated, and often, like BBC, as you'll know this, they change their equipment quite regularly. So hospital radio stations get equipment that's probably only a few years old, and it's a really good way to learn exactly that. We're calling it the desk. We should, just for people that might not know what a desk is, it basically looks like the flight deck.
Yes.
Where you're fading everything in, bringing the music in. It's pretty much everything. You're controlling everything, aren't you? Yeah,
absolutely. And depending on the size of the studio and sort of the size of the station as well, there could be multiple desks. So I have two, and then I have, if I'm presenting at my current station, there's lots of monitors. I've got 3 different monitors, 2 desks, and then I've got a big sort of platform with buttons in front of me as well. So there is actually quite a lot. It's quite technical, and definitely a lot to get your head around to start with. But yeah, it's sort of it's more homely now to me, because I'm quite used to doing it. So I'm not as scared by it anymore.
No, it's really daunting when you first sit in front of it and you go, oh wow, and then you just have to go, well, actually, I only need these sections, so that's okay for now, that's all right. And then gradually, as your confidence builds, you're learning about it. But yeah, it's really, really daunting at first.
Yeah, it is. I think the thing is, because especially if it's live, you don't want to mess anything up, do you? You don't want to break anything or press any buttons or change any settings. And I think that's the sort of scary thing. But they are just buttons at the end of the day. And particularly if you're training on learning how to use a desk, just getting your head around what everything is to start with is a bit daunting, but you always get there. Never be afraid of the desk, basically.
No, absolutely, embrace it, come out of your comfort zone. So the bug started in community radio. What then progressed you forward to get to where you are now? What's in between? So
I went and got a job. Actually, I did I did a couple of interviews for the BBC, because it's always an institution that I've really massively respected, and I kind of just wanted to challenge myself. And I have to mention this one. I was submitting my CV for a lot of things, a lot of radio stations around the country, because to be honest, by that point, my partner and I we'd been living with my parents for nearly a year and a half, and we were just like, we were all sick of that situation, basically. So we were just like, anywhere will do. And because we're fortunate that, we didn't have ties like a house or children or things like that. We could up and go and follow the work, basically. So that was kind of the opportunity. And I applied for a couple of different jobs within the BBC, not necessarily all in radio, just a few things, something to, get my foot in the door, I guess, basically. And I applied to BBC Radio Norfolk for a job, and they they read, I can't even remember what the job was now. I think it was a journalism coordinator, which was formerly known as like a broadcast assistant, basically. And they got back to me. They didn't need to. But basically, I got my rejection email, and I'm used to seeing that by this point, and I was a bit like, oh, you're making a mistake. I'm really, really suited to this, I promise, but whatever. And then I got an email from the hiring manager who said the exec of the station wants to give you some feedback on your CV. So I was like, and your cover letter. So I was like, oh wow, great, okay. Sure, they said, do you want it? I'm like, yeah, of course I do, absolutely. I want to know where I'm going wrong, So he sent me an email very quickly, I must add as well, and he said, these are all the things that you're doing well, but you're just missing these things. These things are the things that you need to really, really focus on. And then he said, you were 1 point away from being in sort of one of the candidates for interview, which was bittersweet. It was bitter because I was like, damn, like, come on, I'm so close. But they obviously saw something in my application. And with the BBC, it's done by points in the interview process. So that's for fairness reasons, basically. So, they couldn't give me the interview because I obviously didn't quite score high enough. But they knew if you just tweak a couple of things and just make sure I was hitting those marks. And I was so grateful for that. Because, he was the exec of the station. He did not need to... he was very senior at the station. And there was no way that he needed to do that. To take time out of his day to help somebody who didn't have any professional radio experience to get into radio. And, that, as soon as I took on his advice, any job that I applied for, I started getting interviews. It literally changed like magic. And then I did end up getting my first BBC job, and it was actually in BBC Children's up in Manchester. Ironically, I'd actually also again interviewed for BBC Radio Norfolk at that point. And unfortunately, by the time that they had interviewed all the candidates, I think there was people who couldn't interview at the specific date, so they had to kind of extend it. And they said I absolutely smashed the process and they wanted to offer me this job. And it was for a Sunday night producer role, I think it was. And by that point, we'd already made the decision to move, because it was basically, do we do this, or do we kind of go up to Manchester? And we thought, do you know what, there's more opportunities. Well, actually, it was Jeremy, it was you and your wife Meredith who kind of actually helped convince me to go, do you know what, go to Manchester. There will be opportunities up there. So I did, and I'm really grateful that I did, because I got this job for BBC Children's for a campaign called BBC Own It, which was an online site to help, initially created to help children, but also it expanded to help not just parents but teachers as well. And I think I needed to do that job whilst it wasn't technically radio related. I needed that because I needed to prove to myself that I could actually challenge myself and do things that I didn't think I could do before, and sort of get myself back into... Well, I mean, I was in a team where I was respected. I'd had a lot of jobs beforehand when I was working in London, or even sort of pandemic jobs working in pubs and stuff like that, where I wouldn't say I had the best time working with the people around me a lot of the time. And now I was finally in a place where I was being asked for my opinions and actually being respected. It was great. And I really, really loved working on the campaign. And it did sort of, coincide with some of my interests, because I did the children's radio on the community radio station. And then I used to be a children's entertainer at parties and things like that. So that sort of interest in, sort of supporting children was great. It was still one of my interests. So it was something I was passionate about. And I achieved so much more than I ever could have thought. There's things that I've created that are up on the BBC website at the moment, which is just like mad. That's really cool. It's just, I don't think I'll ever get over that. It's like there's things that I made, there's resources that I made for teachers that are on the BBC website. I just think that's really, I'm just so humbled by that. But then
it's amazing.
My contract came up to an end, and because it was only a 6-month contract, and it did initially get extended and then extended again and whatever. But I was like, I think it's time for me to get back to radio. And I looked around at some other things, and I had I had quite a lot of interviews, actually. This is the thing. Before this, this advice I got, I would send off applications and CVs all the time. And that was what I was just used to doing, and getting rejection, whatever. Now I had this, sort of toolkit, and obviously BBC on my CV as well. I applied for everything and then got too many interviews. I had an entire month where I was prepping, just interview prepping. And it was like I'd prep for one, I'd do the interview, right, great, next one. And it was just so intense. I don't think I'll ever do that ever again. I'm very fortunate to have been in that position, but I did, I went up for a position in Cardiff. So I went up to the BBC Cardiff office for this interview, and it was for basically it was continuity announcer. So if you don't know what that is, it's the person who says, in between the programs when sort of the credits are rolling, they go, oh, and that was blah blah blah, and next up people, you're going to be watching the news at 6 or whatever it is. And I thought that was a really cool job, and I got very close, but I didn't quite get it, and I was gutted at the time. But also, it's meant that I got to come here. So I now am in Guernsey, in the Channel Islands. I hadn't really heard much about Guernsey before I moved here, I'll be honest. But again, we were in a situation where we were able to move and follow the work. I was initially scared, and then it was my boyfriend who was like, let's do it. So it felt like I was taking a giant leap of faith.
Yeah.
Thank goodness it's paid off.
Well, I think the 3 Ps apply here that you've applied yourself, is that you start with passion. You then have to have persistence and patience to get where you are now. Because you've demonstrated that, and it showed, because the fact is suddenly you had more interviews than you, because you had the passion there, you were persistent, but you also had patience. And I think that the last one there, patience, is the key thing in all the journey, is that you have to, I think, be prepared for people to say no, be prepared for rejection, and if you don't like rejection, then just give up now, because if you can't cope with rejection, then to be successful you have to unfortunately put yourself in a position to fail. And along the route there will be rejections and trials and tribulations along the way that can maybe try and take you off the path to your journey of success. But you've stuck to yours, and that's a real a great credit to you, that what you're doing now from where you started in such a short period of time as well, Steph. It's incredible, absolutely amazing.
It's mad, isn't it? I've been really lucky, actually, I think, but also I've been very spatially aware of what's happening. I was checking the job websites all of the time. It's not like I didn't put the work in. I've definitely put the work in to be here. But I mean, just going back to this point on rejections and things like that, it's human, I think, to be disappointed by things when things don't quite go the way that you want them to. It is human. The thing is, I give myself a time limit. I'm like, right, you can mourn this for this amount of time, and then you've got to move on. And that sort of structure in place helps me personally to not overdwell on it and not get bogged down and sucked in by it, because things like this, they can be really cutthroat, and in the UK it's really, really, really competitive to get into sort of commercial radio, and it's tough. And I think I will always be, as somebody who managed to sort of receive a lot of advice, and as particularly the second community station that I sort of volunteered for, the director of the station gave me so much advice and mentored me for a considerable amount of time. I will forever be grateful for him, and we're still friends now, which is great. But it's about putting in hard work, and just knockbacks will happen, but maybe that's because you're actually meant to do something, and when you're there you'll go, oh, that's why.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that sometimes if you think you're going down a path you didn't want to go down, keep your eyes up in case it's a path you needed to go down. Yeah. And always keep your eyes open for everything. It's, in terms of where you are now, where do you see you go, where do you see yourself going next?
Oh, that is tricky. I mean, I actually had I had a compliment from a guest I interviewed yesterday. He's the former chief economist for Spotify.
Oh wow!
And I interviewed him, and he actually gave me some feedback. Well, he gave the producer some feedback, who passed it on to me, and it was definitely a team effort. But he said that that was one of the best interviews that he'd ever had, and he just appreciated the fact that I was across the brief. And he messaged me on LinkedIn yesterday evening and said that I can't wait to hear you on 5 Live Drive Time. And I sort of laughed, really. But that would be amazing. I'd love to do, Radio 2, I think, would be incredible. Do I get there? Who knows at this point? How exciting is that? I don't know what's going to happen. Even local radio. I love local radio so much because it's so personal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's something magical about hearing, I guess, for sort of larger patches in the UK, like let's say like 3 Counties, for example, that's the one that I listen to, sort of where I'm from. And even though it's 3 counties and, that's Herts, Beds and Bucks, if they mentioned the name Milton Keynes, I'd get excited.
Yeah,
that's where I'm from, So that's what I really liked about, about local radio. So I don't know, I'd love to do, sort of various areas of local radio presenting, but maybe different areas around the country in the future. Maybe I stay at BBC Radio Guernsey for the rest of my life, and I become an old woman who basically lives in this chair. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, Radio 2 would be amazing. But if this is where I end up, what a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an incredible journey, but I think it's just the start. And I think, the world's your oyster as far as I'm concerned. I think you'll go far because you'll just have a lovely natural interest in people. And that was one thing I noticed when we were at the community radio together. I used to listen to your kids' show, and I loved the little features you did because I thought that is what radio is all about, is getting your community's voice heard, getting voice snippets, getting bits in there. If it's someone's birthday, give them a shout out. There's nothing better than hearing either your town or your name called out on radio for good reasons. And, it's so important. And I think, as a radio presenter, you definitely get that. And I think working within communities, you find out so much, and you want to help, and community for me is one of those things that is so important. And I think it's so important to also teach people the importance of community. And that's where good community radio comes in. Of looking out for each other. Someone's lost a dog, sorts of things. It gives it a lovely warm feeling and a sense of purpose and existence.
I did actually do that today. I had somebody texting about their lost cat, so I read that one. But that's what it's about, isn't it? I mean, it sounds ridiculous actually sometimes, but actually, do you know what? Like, if people in the community go, "Oh no, like I've got a cat and I don't want to," I'd want this to be happening if I lost my cat, or do you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's that community-ness of it is something I think I've always been passionate about. I think it's because I grew up in a very sort of country village, where community was a really, really important thing, and I guess that's always stuck with me through anything I've wanted to do. Really, I think, it's funny, I was thinking about this the other day. This is a slight tangent, but I was thinking about, I'm meant to be here right now, but it's taken me, over a decade to get to where I am. And that wasn't always trying to get into radio, bearing in mind. That was, working in service jobs and, working in giant department stores, handing out, those little perfume paper things and getting ignored by people. But it's actually everything you do helps. The reason that I think I'm good at talking to people and interviewing people, I mean, I interviewed people a lot through sort of various jobs actually before, but, take the children's parties, for example. You kind of have to control the situation. You have to adapt. It is live, and you have to talk to the parents and, particularly, the ones who have booked the party and, sort of arrange things. So everything you do kind of does teach you the skills that are relevant.
Yes,
to be in radio, and for anyone who's wanting to get into it and has to convince somebody why. Those are the things, you know, if you don't have direct radio experience, I mean, don't expect to go straight to the top, of course, but you just, you know, you talk about the transferable skills and the fact, you know, and volunteering can never go amiss. If you volunteered for a significant amount of time, it shows that you're dedicated as well, I think.
This has been a wonderful chat, Steph. I've really enjoyed it. And I think that just the interview alone, there's little snippets of advice and tips in there littered right through. But if you could pass on any particular specific advice to someone looking to get into radio, to get to where you are now, what would that advice be?
I think my advice is knowing that people aren't as scary as you think they are. People who work professionally in radio aren't on a pedestal. They are just normal human people who do their work day, go home, cook their dinner, walk their dog, or do whatever it is that the exact same things that everyone else does. And with that in mind, if you want to ask somebody anything or get some advice, look them up, you know, find them on LinkedIn, send them a message, and don't be afraid. Don't feel like you have to be, you know, sort of, dear sir, you know, it's an absolute pleasure to be in contact. You don't need to do that. They're just people. Be like, hi, listen, I've got a big interest in radio. I prefer chatting with people who don't feel like they have to sort of impress me, basically. And I know I felt like I needed to do that before I got into radio as well. So don't be afraid to contact people. And the thing is, if it's anybody like me who's found people who have been able to give them guidance, they'll help as well. It's all about paying it forward. I love helping people and giving people advice about how to get into radio. So that's sort of number one. Number two is really just to put the work in. I think it's never a thing where you can sort of click your heels together and you know, sort of magic yourself into radio, particularly if it's something like presenting as well. It's a very competitive game, particularly, I mean, at the moment, it's very competitive, even more so. Put the work in, do volunteer somewhere, and don't rush to the next thing. You know, volunteer, take a decent amount of time. If it's something that you really want to do it for, you know, a year or you know, 2, if you want to, like, do it for a considerable amount of time. You'll learn so much about how it works. Things like back timing, which is, if for anybody who doesn't know, back timing is when you have to be out of the hour by a particular point because the news is coming in. So at the BBC, we have a news jingle that is 17 seconds. I have to be out at 59:43 on the hour. And so therefore I need to play the last song, or I need to talk into it, but I normally play a song into the news. You know, you need to make sure that song ends at 59:43, so you can press the button for the news, and then as it goes, bong, it's dead on the hour. So things like that, you learn through community radio, and you learn how you practice with back timing and things like that. And it, you know, you get good at it once you practice enough. And the last thing, and I think I've sort of already kind of mentioned it, but don't be too harsh on yourself. Just allow yourself to play and experiment, particularly in a volunteer setting, a community setting. Always ask questions. Always be hungry for knowledge. Gosh, this is a lot of advice, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to maybe put some of that into subscription and people can pay for that. No, I'm all about giving. And I think that's really important advice. And the one about connecting with people on LinkedIn, I absolutely agree with. You know, don't be around the bush, don't be bashful, just be like, hiya. You know, I'm not just messaging to just getting to know you. I just want to find out about radio. Can you help? You know, just be direct.
being specific as well, because I had one recently that was like, what's it like working in radio? And I was like, well, what do you mean? You know, what part? It's fun. Like, I don't know what the answer is. Know what kind of answer you want. Maybe if it's, you know, that if that's not specific, but definitely use things like LinkedIn and engage more on LinkedIn. I think it's a really, really powerful tool to connect with professionals and follow people. And, you know, even things like social media on Instagram, follow your stations, be aware of the content. This is the other thing. This is a really good point. If you ever go and talk to a station about volunteering or working from them, listen to the content beforehand. It doesn't need to be sort of, you know, months back in advance, but particularly if it's sort of like something quite news based, you know, listen to the stories that they're talking about. talk about those stories in the interview, because they'll have been in those meetings, so they'll know it, they'll be on top of it as well. But it's important, it's so important to know the content of the station that you're wanting to work at. You don't need to know every single presenter's name or whatever, but just knowing the content shows that you're taking it seriously. And also listening to the style and sort of absorbing that, you know, their pattern of work really shows that you're interested, shows that you care. And that's what people, the thing is, you know, at the end of the day, radio is all about storytelling. Yes. And, you know, particularly because, I came into BBC Radio Guernsey as a journalist. I now do more producing and presenting, which I love. Producing is so exciting as well. Producing a live show, at least. But the familiarity of that, and also the benefit I had of working as a journalist beforehand as well, is the storytelling aspect of it. You know, I like to do interviews with people and tell a story through those interviews that I do. So I think learn your style of storytelling. My style of storytelling is so different to a lot of people in the office that I work in, but it works for what I do, and I do what I do quite well.
Really well.
I hope so, at least. You know, I enjoy. That sounds really braggy, doesn't it? I enjoy what I do.
Steph, unfortunately, our time now is almost up. But this has been, I could chat for hours. This has been an absolute joy. So thank you so much for coming on today and telling us your story. It was so insightful. And as I say, the advice you've given, incredible advice. So thank you so much. If the listeners want to connect with you, keep in touch, or listen and tune into your shows, what's the best way to do that?
So you can listen to me on BBC Radio Guernsey on BBC Sounds. I cover a variation of shows, so lots of different times, basically. So you catch me when you catch me is the real one. But you can follow me. I do post a lot about when I'm presenting on my Instagram, which is at Steph on the Radio. And the same with my Twitter as well, at Steph on the Radio, but also LinkedIn. Again, as I was saying previously, LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to connect with people on there, and as long as I've got a couple of minutes of space, I'm really happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
That's very kind. We'll put all those links in the show notes. But thank you once again, Steph, for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to my guests for joining me today here on the Your Voice Here podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about what we discussed on today's episode, along with finding out a bit more about our guest, then check out the show notes for more details. And of course, thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in. It's greatly appreciated, and it's nice to know someone's actually listening to me. If you'd like to find out more about Your Voice Here, again, check out the show notes. If you'd like to get in touch, then you can email hello@yourvoicehere.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. Now, before every interview, I try and warm up every guest by doing a quick fire question round. It acts as a nice way to get them laughing, warming up their vocal cords, and just to relax them a little bit. Give it a try if you're a podcaster. Free tip, there you go. I did think though, what shall I do with all these quick fire question rounds that don't really make it into the podcast? Well, why not just bolt it onto the end and see if listeners like it. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to you joining me next time. Take care. We're going to have some fun. We're going to rattle through some quick fire questions. We're going to try and do this in under a minute if we can. So are you ready?
I am ready, yes. I'm feeling prepped and ready to go for this. Let's do it.
Let's go. Dog or cat?
Dog.
Death row meal?
Oh, that's the second question, Jeremy. You're going to throw that at me. A quick fire. Maybe lamb shanks.
Nice choice. One word that would describe you?
Odd. That's really sad. That's the first one that comes to mind, isn't it?
It's fine. That's what I want. Natural reactions. It's fine. X-ray vision or ability to fly?
See, I'd love to have the ability to fly, but I'm afraid of heights, so I feel like that would be quite a conflict, really. I'm going to say, what was the other one?
X-ray vision.
X-ray vision. Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Most have gone for that, and they've usually gone for it for quite sinister reasons. If you could travel back in time and just go back and see one thing, what would it be?
Oh, see one thing. I would like to see. That's a really tough one. I mean, it's got to be a big momentous moment, hasn't it? A big historical moment, or maybe something in music. Actually, I'd love to see maybe Freddie Mercury live in concert. I think that would be a really cool one.
That'd be amazing.
Go back to.
I think if I ever had a time machine, I'd just go back to old gigs just to see. Yeah, totally. Polka dots or plaid?
Probably plaid, but I think I wear more polka dots at the moment.
Nice. Jaffa cake or biscuit?
It's a cake that you can have with a cup of tea. It is a cake, isn't it?
Technically, it is a cake. Officially, it's a cake. I think officially it's a cake. Favourite theme park in the world?
I'm afraid of roller coasters, Jeremy. I sat on a roller coaster once in Florida, and when they put the bar over the top of you, I had dug my nails into it so hard. I had foam in my nails afterwards. But what's the one with air? It's the one, Alton Towers. I've been on a couple of rides there. I've actually been on them, and I did enjoy them, if not being slightly terrified. So probably that one.
That's the one where you're flying, isn't it? Like you sort of go horizontal. Yeah, I know the one. Oh, no, that's a good choice. What's the last thing you ate?
I've just had a biscuit, actually, a proper biscuit, not a Jaffa cake.
Oh, a proper biscuit
with my cup of tea.
Nice. Favourite time of the year?
I think autumn, like the beginning of autumn. So you still get a little bit of the heat from the summer. You still get the light in the day, but you get the colours turning.
Absolutely, just those beautiful rustic colours.
It is. When you're like driving through the countryside in autumn, it is just the most magical thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to drive around a lot for an old job that I had, and it was honestly like when I'd have to do sort of jobs out like quite far in the country, it was just beautiful, breathtaking, and I had to remind myself to concentrate on the road.
Oh yeah, I often found that driving home from work sometimes I'd take the long way home to make sure I go through the countryside.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's glorious. It's fabulous. Just simple things like that, nature. Just is so wonderful.
Yeah.
A good night in.
Good night in. Is this just myself, or me with my partner, or me with a couple of people, or is...
However you want to answer the question. It's whatever you define as a good night in, whether your partner's there or it's just you on your own, or what's a good night in for you?
I mean, it probably depends on how sociable I'm feeling. I would say maybe, there's got to be a film of some kind on, couple of beers. If it's a gathering of people, then a really good board game with people who do board games properly. Like people who actually want to play. There's nothing worse than playing a board game with somebody who doesn't like them.
No, I love a board game, and it's one of those things. I agree. Meredith, my wife, I have to explain the rules so many times that in the end I just go, let's just park it. Let's just park it. Let's just leave it. A good night out.
Do you know, I love going out to see comedy, or going to watch the theatre, or comedy night or theatre, I'd say, again with a couple of beers.
Nice choice. How would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered. That would be the nice thing. I'd like to be remembered as somebody who... That's a really good question, Jeremy. I'd like to be remembered as somebody who, if there's something I believed in, I've kind of really supported it and gone after it, and kind of been an advocate, I guess, for things that I believe in. I think that's how I'd like to be remembered.
Job done. Steph, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jeremy, cut it out.